The river took him first and gave him back changed. It happened on a Tuesday in late June, by the reckoning of the company's ledger book, though no one aboard the wagons could have told you the date without checking, because days on the Platte had long since stopped mattering as days and started mattering only as miles. The water that morning ran the color of weak coffee, swollen from 3 days of rain up country, and it moved faster than any of the men on the bank had accounted for when they sent the horses in first. What the company saw, standing in a loose and silent row along the mud-slick edge, was this: a trail guide, a big man, broad through the shoulders, the kind whose voice carried without effort, and who had used that voice 4 days earlier to call a woman dead weight in front of every family at the fire, thrown from his horse mid-current, swallowed once, twice, by brown water that did not care what he weighed or who he was. And they saw a heavy-set widow, skirts already sodden to the waist, before anyone else had moved, wading out past where the men had judged it too dangerous to go. No one shouted for her to stop. No one shouted anything at all. That silence would be remembered later, by more than one witness, as the strangest part of the whole morning. Not the drowning man, not the woman in the water, but the stillness of 24 grown men standing on dry ground with their hands doing nothing. She did not swim so much as fight, one boot lost to the mud, her arms doing work that arms were not, by any polite reckoning, supposed to be able to do. She got a fist into his collar. She got her feet under her on a gravel shelf the current hadn't claimed. And then, inch by inch, weight against weight, she hauled a man twice named unfit for the trail out of a river that had already decided to keep him. He came up coughing water and blood, his leg bent wrong beneath him in a way that told its own story before he ever spoke a word. She did not let go of his collar until his back was flat against the mud and the sky. The company watched this happen without a sound. Whatever they had believed about her 4 days before, about size, about usefulness, about who among them was worth the trouble of feeding, did not survive the sight of her standing over him, chest heaving, water running off her skirts in ropes, while he lay there staring up at the woman he had mocked, as though he were only now, for the first time, seeing her at all. To understand how they came to that river, how a man's contempt and a woman's silence had traveled, side by side, all the way from a fire 4 nights back, you would have to go further upstream than the Platte. You would have to go back to the beginning of the trail itself. Weeks earlier, the trail began the way it always began, before the sun, in the gray hour when the dew had not yet burned off the wagon tongues and the oxen stood chained to their yokes like patient penitents. Dust had not yet risen. That came later, by mid-morning, when 300 wheels and 80 hooves ground the prairie into a fine yellow powder that coated tin cups, hair, the folds of a bonnet, the inside of a mouth. In those early weeks, the company still believed the journey could be managed, rationed, held to a schedule written on paper back in Independence, by men who had never walked it. She was awake before the rest of them. This was not virtue. It was arithmetic. 30 mouths needed feeding from flour sacks that had been measured for 20, and there was no reckoning that made the difference disappear, except a woman rising in the dark to stretch what little there was. She worked by feel more than sight, kneading a dough thinned with water until it barely held together, portioning it by touch into rounds no thicker than a coin, laying them on the flat iron over coals she had banked the night before, so they would still hold heat at dawn. She did not measure with a cup, she measured with her hands, the same broad hands that had once, another life ago, been called too big for delicate work by a husband who preferred a wife whose wrists he could circle with his fingers. Out here, no one asked for delicate work. They asked for bread that did not run out. The families took their portions without much looking at her, a child's hand reaching up, a murmured word of thanks swallowed by the business of loading wagons, a man taking his share and turning away, already thinking of the day's miles. She did not mind the lack of ceremony. She had long since stopped expecting to be seen in the moment of the giving. It was enough, some mornings, simply to watch them eat and know that the number came out even, that no one would walk the day hungry because of a mistake in her measuring. The trail guide noticed none of this. He rode the line at first light, counting wagons, counting oxen, counting the hours of daylight left before the next river crossing, And he did not count the flour, or the hands that stretched it, or the woman who rose before the camp to make certain 30 people could walk another 18 miles on rations meant for less. To him, she was a shape at the back of a wagon, slower than the rest, a name he had not troubled to remember, attached to a body he had already decided was a debt the company could not afford. He would say so, before the week was out, loud enough for the fire to hear it. But that morning, dust still low, coals still gray, she was only a woman working flour with her hands in the dark, feeding people who did not yet know what she was worth. The women who washed at the creek's edge that morning had questions, the way women on a trail always did. Questions passed hand to hand like a shared kettle, never quite reaching the person they were about. Where was her husband? Why did a woman travel a wagon meant for 2 grown men and a boy, with no man's boots drying by her fire at night? Why the wagon sat heavier than the others, its axle groaning on the grade, when a widow alone should have pared her load to nothing, sold the extra plow, left behind the second trunk? She heard the questions the way she heard most things aimed at her back, clearly, and without turning around. A woman with a sunburned neck and a baby on her hip asked her outright, not unkindly, while they knelt together over the water, asked if she had buried him on the trail or left him behind in Missouri. The cast-iron pot sat between them, blackened, dented along one side in a shape almost like a fist, and she scrubbed at its inside with a fistful of sand and did not look up. She said only that he was not coming. The woman waited for more. There was no more given. She rinsed the pot, turned it once in the current to check the seasoning had not washed thin, and set it in the sun to dry, and the silence she offered was not the silence of grief exactly, nor the silence of shame, but something harder to name, the silence of a door that had been shut a long time ago, and painted over so many times since that no one, including her, could say any more what color it had been underneath. Other answers came later, in scraps, none of them from her. A man who had known her in Missouri said she'd had a husband, a farmer, gone now, though whether by fever or by his own choosing to be gone, the man could not say with certainty, and admitted as much, and so the camp settled on Fever, because Fever asked nothing further of anyone. A child said her wagon carried her husband's tools, too heavy to leave, too dear to sell. No one asked why a widow bound for open land would need a plow blade forged for 2 men to lift, or why the trunk beneath her cookware had a lock on it still, though the key, if she carried one, showed itself to no one. She let them talk. She had found, over the miles, that people filled silence with whatever story suited their comfort, and their comfort was no business of hers. She fed the camp in the mornings, and fed it in the evenings, and between those hours, she tended the pot the way another woman might tend a grave, with a care that asked no questions and answered none, and the wagon rolled on behind her, its weight her own to carry, its cause her own to keep. Silas Bragg had been hired at Independence for one reason only, and it was not his temper. He could read a river the way other men read scripture, with reverence, and with the understanding that misreading it cost lives. The company had watched him stand at the blue crossing for the better part of an hour before he'd let a single wheel touch water, walking the bank upstream and down, studying the color of the current where it broke over a shelf of rock, judging by the angle of drift how deep the channel ran beneath the brown surface. He had told them, flatly, that the ford was 200 yards south of where the old maps marked it, because the river had moved itself sometime in the spring flood, and rivers out here did not stay put simply because a man had once drawn a line for them. He had been right. He was usually right, and the company had learned to trust the rightness even where they could not warm to the man delivering it. He read weather the same way he read water, the color low on the horizon at dawn, the particular stillness that came before hail, the smell of ozone carried on a wind still an hour distant. He had turned the train back from a crossing once on nothing more than the flatness of the light, and 3 hours later, a wall of rain had come down the draw they would have been standing in. No one had thanked him for it aloud. He had not seemed to want thanks, only obedience, and obedience was what he got, mostly, because the alternative was a shallow grave 1,000 miles from anywhere a stone could be cut to mark it. But competence, in him, had curdled into something closer to contempt, for anyone who could not match his pace. He did not suffer slow oxen gladly, or lame mules, or wagons whose axles groaned under too much hoarded weight, or families who lingered over breakfast fires while the sun climbed. He said what he thought, and what he thought came out short, and what came out short landed on whoever was nearest. A boy who'd let a wheel mire in a slough, a woman who'd wept over a dead child rather than bury it and move on by noon. He was not cruel for pleasure. He simply believed, the way some men believe in Scripture, that the trail did not care for excuses, and that a man who made room for excuses was a man who would bury more of his company than he needed to. It was this belief, more than any particular meanness in him, that had put him at the fire 2 nights past, looking at a heavy-set widow's wagon and doing the arithmetic of miles and weight and patience, and finding her wanting before he had troubled to ask what she carried, or why, or at what cost to herself she carried it. What the record shows, if a man troubles to look past the arithmetic of miles, is that the widow fed the children first. Every evening, without exception, before the pot had finished its second boil, she filled the smallest bowls and set them into the smallest hands, and only then did she ladle for the grown. It was not a rule she spoke aloud. It was simply the order things happened in, the way water runs downhill, and nobody in the camp had thought to remark on it, because nobody in the camp had thought to watch her closely enough to notice a pattern at all. The elderly surgeon who traveled with the company, a spare, silver-whiskered man who had buried more strangers than he could name and asked for little beyond quinine and quiet, noticed. He noticed because he had nothing else to do of an evening but sit near the fire with his bad hip stretched toward the heat and observe the small commerce of the camp the way another man might read a newspaper. He watched her divide a rasher of salt pork 3 ways among children who were not hers, cutting the fat thin so the lean went further, and take for herself the piece nearest the bone, which was mostly gristle, and did not weigh much on a plate or in a stomach either. He watched her check a boy's blistered heel by firelight, unwrapping a rag gone stiff with dried blood, murmuring something too low to carry, and rewrapping it looser. He watched a widow of 11 days, gray-faced and silent since her husband's grave marker had gone up on the trail 3 mornings back, accept a tin cup of broth from the heavy-set woman's hands, without either of them speaking a word, and drink it slow, the way a person drinks when drinking is the only kindness left to them that day. "You've done that before," the surgeon said to her once, meaning the broth, meaning all of it. "Man doesn't forget how to eat," she said, just because his wife did the feeding. He took her meaning correctly, that she was not speaking of the widow, or not only of her, and he did not press further, because pressing was not his nature, and because the fire was warm, and his hip ached less when he sat still. It was a small exchange. It would not have troubled the ledger of the day's miles, or the guide's tally of who slowed the company, and by how much. But the surgeon, who had watched a great many people die of things other than fever, of neglect, of shame, of simple unwatched hunger, set it down in his own private accounting, the one he kept behind his eyes, rather than in any book, that this was a woman who fed a camp better than the camp deserved, and that no one else appeared to be counting it. The fire burned low, the children slept. Somewhere past the ring of wagons, the guide walked the picket line counting horses, unaware that anyone was keeping a tally on him too. The next evening came on slower, the kind of slow that wears at men who have spent their patience on mud and dead oxen. The company had covered 9 miles, instead of the 14 the guide had promised at dawn, and he counted the shortfall the way other men counted money owed them. He rode the line twice before supper, jaw tight, boots dark to the ankle, with river silt that would not dry. She had the pot going before the wagons finished circling, because that was the order of things she had set for herself, and did not deviate from it for weather or temper. Salt pork, dried beans soaked since noon, a heel of bread going hard that she'd crumbled in rather than waste. It was not much. It was more than most fires that night would show. He came to the ring of light with the look of a man who had decided, somewhere on the picket line, to say a thing he'd been carrying since the ford. 9 miles, he said, to no one and to everyone. 9, when we ought to have made 14. He let it sit. Then his eyes went to her, to the width of her at the fire, the deliberate slowness with which she worked the ladle, and something in him, tiredness, or the old habit of a man who mistook cruelty for leadership, decided she would carry the weight of his failure better than his own miscalculation would. "Some of us," he said, "are dead weight on a trail that don't forgive it. I've said as much before. I'll say it again for them as didn't hear it the first time." He did not look away from her while he said it, though he did not name her outright. Did not need to. The whole ring of firelight understood who he meant, and a few faces turned down toward their plates, the way faces do when they are grateful the shame has landed elsewhere. She did not answer him with words. She stirred the pot. The ladle scraped once against the iron bottom, a small sound, deliberate, the only sound she made that was not required by the cooking itself. Her face did not change in any way a man watching for weakness could have used against her. She ladled a portion for the family nearest her, the mother with the fevered child, before she served her own, which was the order she always kept, guide's tally or no. The surgeon watched this from the far side of the fire and said nothing either, though later, in the private ledger behind his eyes, he wrote it down beside the other entries. That a woman insulted at supper had fed the sick child first anyway, and that the guide, for all his counting, had not once in 11 weeks lifted a ladle himself. The fire cracked, the stew went round the circle, and somewhere in the dark past the wagons, the river that would nearly kill him within the week, moved on toward the ford, indifferent, patient, already waiting. The days after moved the way water moves around a stone, parting, then closing again as though nothing had ever interrupted the flow. She noticed it in small ways first. A family who had once asked her to mind their boy while they scouted for firewood no longer asked. A woman who had borrowed her thread for a torn hem returned it with a nod instead of the usual talk about husbands and weather. No one said why. No one needed to. The guide's words had done their work quietly, the way frost does, settling into places no one thought to check until the damage showed. She did not chase after the warmth that had cooled. She had learned long before the trail that chasing only confirmed what people already believed about a woman built the way she was, that she wanted something, that she was owed attention she had not earned. So she kept to her fire, kept to her ladle, kept the tally of mouths fed exact to the portion, and let the camp arrange itself around her absence from its evening talk. It was on the third night that the surgeon came to her fire alone, without the excuse of a patient, carrying his own tin plate as though it were an ordinary errand, and not the first time in 11 weeks he had crossed the camp for anything but blood or fever. He held the plate out. She filled it. He did not leave. "That was a good stew," he said, which was not a large thing to say, and he seemed to know it was not large, and said it anyway. She looked at him the way she looked at weather that might or might not turn, assessing, not trusting yet. "Onions were old," she said. "Had to cut round the soft parts." "Didn't taste it," he said, and there was something almost like an apology folded into the flatness of his voice, though he did not spend it on the guide, only on the stew, which was its own kind of honesty. He ate standing, the way men do when they mean to leave soon, but have not yet found the reason to. When he handed the plate back, he held her eyes a moment longer than the exchange required, and said, "Fed the fevered boy first again. He needed it first." Guide didn't notice that part. "Guide doesn't notice much that isn't his own legroom in the saddle," she said, and regretted it only slightly, and he almost smiled, which for a man who spent his days sewing wounds and setting bone, was as close to laughter as the trail allowed him. He left without ceremony, the way he had come, and she stood a while after with the ladle still in her hand, turning the small exchange over the way she turned over coins she was not sure she was allowed to keep. It was not friendship, it was not even kindness exactly. But it was a man crossing a camp that had quietly decided not to look at her, and looking anyway, and she filed it beside the other small proofs she kept, that she was not, whatever the guide had said loud enough for every family to hear, entirely without a place at the fire. That night the fire burned low and the camp settled into its usual arrangement of snores and coughing, and the far-off complaint of oxen shifting their weight in the dark, and she lay under the wagon with her shawl pulled tight and found, as she often did at that hour, that sleep would not come without first passing through the house she no longer owned. It had been 2 winters. She counted them the way she counted flour, by what was left, not by what had been spent. 2 winters since the kitchen in Missouri, the one with the crack in the north window that let in a draft shaped like a blade, the one she had scrubbed and blacked and fed a husband from for 11 years, without once being asked if the work suited her, only if the food was hot enough. He had not raised his voice that night. That was the detail she returned to most, lying under wagons on strange rivers, 1,000 miles from that kitchen. He had not shouted. He had simply set down his fork, looked at her the way a man looks at furniture he has decided to replace, and said the words plain, the same words, near enough that the guide would say years later, at a different fire, in front of different strangers. Dead weight. He had said he needed a wife who could keep pace with a farm that was growing, and she had understood, slowly, over the following days, that the farm was not the thing growing. The hired girl had arrived within the month, young, quick on her feet, able to carry 2 pails where Ruth carried 1, though Ruth had never once dropped what she carried. She had been given 3 days to leave the house she had built her whole married life around, and had left with a trunk, a Dutch oven, and no letter of introduction to anyone, because there had been no one to write it. She did not weep over it anymore, or told herself she did not, which came to nearly the same thing after enough nights of practicing the difference. What she did instead, lying under the wagon with the cold working up through the canvas groundcloth, was turn the memory the way she turned dough, folding it, working it, until it lost its shape and became simply a thing she had survived, rather than a wound freshly made. She had built a life out of being told she was too much of one thing and not enough of another, and had learned, the hard way that widowhood and abandonment both teach, that a woman could be discarded twice by 2 different men, using nearly the same words, and still wake before dawn to build the fire that fed 40 people who had not asked her to. She thought, before sleep finally came, of the man with the fevered boy's tin plate, and did not know yet what to do with the thought, only that it was there, small and stubborn, refusing to lie down beside the rest. What the record does not say plainly, but what could be pieced together from the way she spoke of it later, in fragments, to no one in particular while kneading bread, was this. After the second man left, for there had been a husband before the trail, and the word he used for her had been the same word, near enough, that the trail guide would use months later at a fire in front of 40 strangers. She had not gone to her sister's house in the valley, though the letter inviting her had come, stiff with obligation, 3 weeks after he rode off. She had read that letter twice and burned it once, and told herself the burning was practical, that paper was scarce, and did not examine the satisfaction it gave her. She had sold the farm instead. 40 acres, a barn with a leaning roof, 2 milk cows and a plow horse gone lame in one foreleg. She had sold all of it for less than it was worth, to a neighbor who did not meet her eyes during the transaction, and had counted the money twice on her own kitchen table, before she believed it was truly hers to keep. There had been a winter after that, alone in a rented room above a feed store, where she had learned what it cost a woman to feed only herself, less than she expected, and lonelier than she could have said. She had taken in mending. She had baked for the store owner's family on Sundays, in trade for firewood. She had discovered, in the slow accounting of that winter, that she required almost nothing from anyone, and that the almost nothing she did require, she could earn with her own hands, if she was willing to work harder than the men around her assumed a woman her size could work. Her sister had written again in the spring, kinder this time, offering a spare room and a place at a table that would never quite feel like her own. She had written back that she was joining a train west instead, and had not explained further, because there was no way to explain to a woman with a husband and 4 children and a house that had never once emptied out from under her, that dependence, even kind dependence, was its own kind of discarding, quieter, wrapped in courtesy, but discarding all the same. So she had signed her name to a company list in a land office that smelled of tallow and old paper, and had paid her fee, and had told the clerk, when he asked where her husband was, that there was no husband, in a voice flat enough that he did not ask again. That flatness, she had come to understand since, was not coldness. It was the shape a woman's voice took when she had decided, somewhere in a rented room above a feed store, that she would not be discarded twice without putting up a fight for herself, and that she would not, in fighting, become the kind of person who discarded others in turn. What the company did not know of him could have filled a second wagon, and he kept it that way on purpose. After the fires had burned down to their orange hearts, and the last of the children had been carried, sleeping, into their tents, he would sit apart from the others, with his splinted legs stretched stiff before him, and he would take from beneath the seatboard of his wagon a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, tied with a strip of harness leather gone soft from handling. He did not open it in front of anyone. He had learned, 3 trains ago, that grief shown to strangers became a story they told at other fires, embellished a little each time it passed from mouth to mouth, until it belonged to everyone but him. The bundle held a piece of grave marker, split from a cottonwood plank, the lettering cut shallow with a hunting knife, by a man who had never been taught to carve, and had done it anyway because there was no one within 40 miles who could do it better. He did not read the letters anymore. He had them by memory, the way a man has the weight of his own hand. A wife's name, a boy's name beneath it. No dates, because he had not trusted himself, in that week, to carve numbers that would still be legible after the frost heaved the ground. He had left them on a rise above a river with no name he had ever learned, in a country he had not been back to in 11 years, and he had carried the broken half of their marker west with him ever since, not out of any hope of returning it to the grave, which he understood. In the plain, unsentimental way he understood most things, was likely long since grown over or washed out or plowed under by some rancher who did not know what he had turned his share past. But because a man needed one object in the world that did not require explaining to anyone, that asked nothing of him but to be carried. He turned it over once in his hands, the grain of it familiar as a scar, and thought, not for the first time, that he had spent 11 years being useful to strangers, instead of being anything at all to the 2 people he had failed to keep alive. Usefulness had been easier. It did not ask a man to feel what he could not afford to feel, and still get up the next morning to scout a crossing, or gentle a spooked team. He wrapped the marker again, slow, the way another man might handle a rosary he no longer prayed with but could not put down, and set it back beneath the seatboard. Somewhere across the camp, a woman's low voice was still moving among the last banked coals, checking a pot that did not need checking, and he watched the shape of her working in the dark for longer than he meant to, before he made himself stop. He had not gone to the fire that evening. This was the kind of thing that could be pieced together only after the fact, the way a man reads sign left in dust days old, the leg propped stiff against the wagon wheel. The untouched trencher, a family 2 wagons down, had passed his way, and then quietly reclaimed when he waved it off. He had told himself it was pain keeping him from the circle of light, and it was, but it was also the particular shame of a man who had spoken cruelly and then needed the very hands he'd insulted to bind his splint each night. Pride does not eat well. It goes hungry, and calls the hunger discipline. What happened next, no one saw directly, which is why it took the longest to come together. Sometime after the coffee had gone to sludge, and the children had been called in from the dark, a plate appeared at the foot of his bedroll. No knock, no cleared throat, just tin catching the last of the firelight, and beside it, a spoon laid the way a person lays a thing down when they do not want to be caught in the act of laying it. He must have heard the footsteps retreat before he opened his eyes. There was cornmeal on the plate, and a strip of dried meat softened in broth, and beneath it, this detail survived, told later by more than one witness, though none had seen the plate itself, a biscuit split and buttered, though butter was down to a hoarded half-crock and rationed by ounces. He ate it slowly, sitting up against the wheel spoke, the leg throbbing in time with his pulse, and he did not call out into the dark to thank whoever had left it, because a man who has spent a week mocking a woman's size does not know how to speak her name across a camp without the words curdling in his mouth on the way out. He set the plate outside his bedroll clean before he slept, the way a man returns a borrowed tool. The change came the next morning, small enough that most of the camp missed it entirely. She was working a griddle over the low coals, turning flapjacks with the flat efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 mornings and expected 10,000 more. When he came around the wagon on the crutch, he'd whittled himself, favoring the bad leg, and stopped near enough to be heard without shouting. "Coffee's burnt," he said, not a complaint, almost an offering, the only currency he had learned to trade in. She did not look up from the griddle. "It's always burnt an hour past sunup. You'd know if you came for it sooner." It was not warmth, not yet. No one watching would have called it warmth. But there was no contempt in it either, no edge sharpened for an audience. And that absence was itself a kind of news that traveled quietly down the line of wagons before the teams were even hitched, the way news travels among people who have learned to read weather in small things, because the large things are too dangerous to name outright. The record shows the train came upon the second river 11 days after the first, and this one bore no resemblance to the shallow, sun-warmed crossing where the current had first done its damage. Whoever kept the log of that stretch of trail, and someone always did, in pencil, in a ledger swollen with damp, wrote only that the water ran high and brown and fast, fed by snowmelt from mountains the wagons had not yet seen, and that the guide sat his horse a long while at the bank before he said anything at all. He studied it the way a man studies a debt he cannot avoid paying. The crutch was gone by then. Traded for a cane, he still needed more than he admitted, and he rode with the bad leg held stiff against the stirrup, watching the water break white over rocks that had not shown themselves the week before. The families gathered behind him in a loose, uneasy line, and the murmur that ran through them was not the murmur of people deciding whether to cross, but of people already certain they should not, waiting only to hear it said aloud by someone whose word carried weight. He did not say it aloud. That was its own kind of testimony, if anyone had thought to read it as such. He sent 2 riders upstream to look for a narrower point, and when they came back shaking their heads, he sent them down again, and the day wore on in that manner. Small errands, small failures, the sun climbing and falling toward the western bluffs, while the current kept its argument going without pause. Children were kept back from the bank by mothers who did not need to be told twice. A dog got loose near the water and was hauled back by its collar before it reached the mud. She worked through the waiting, the way she worked through everything, feeding the fires, mending a wheel, spoke with the ranch hand's borrowed tools, keeping her own team calm, with a hand flat against each nose in turn. But she watched the water too, when she thought no one was watching her watch it, and something in the set of her shoulders suggested she remembered another river well enough that she did not need to be told what fast water could do to a body that went under believing itself strong enough to answer it. Toward evening, the guide came off his horse, slow, careful, testing the leg's answer to the ground, and stood at the very edge where the bank crumbled soft and dark into the current. He said nothing to the families waiting behind him. He looked at the water the way a man looks at an old injury that has healed wrong and aches worse before weather changes, and somewhere in that looking was the shape of a decision he had not yet spoken, though every person on that bank understood, without a word passing, that it was coming. He gave the order the way he gave every order now, quieter than before, but with the old certainty still under it, like bone under a bruise. The first wagon went down the cut bank with its brake chained tight, the driver leaning back against the weight of it, and the mules found their footing in the shallows before the current took hold of the wheels and turned the crossing into something the men on the bank measured with their whole bodies, leaning as if their own weight could steady a wagon 40 feet off. He rode ahead of each one. That was the method he had settled on since the leg had gone bad. He would not trust another man's eye for the channel, not even now, maybe especially now. He walked the horse into water that came to its belly and held there, marking with the flat of his hand where the bottom dropped and where it held firm, calling the line back to the drivers, in a voice pitched low and even. The families crossed one after another through the afternoon, the sound of it steady, water against wood, the mules blowing, a child crying once and being hushed. Her wagon came near the end of the order, not first, not last, the position it had held since the trail had quietly decided she was neither a burden to be rid of quickly, nor a curiosity to be delayed. She drove it herself, as she always had. Her hands wrapped twice around the reins. Her weight set low and forward, the way a person sets themselves who has learned that balance is a kind of strength no one gives credit for. He watched her come down the bank the way he had watched the others, but something in his stillness changed, some fraction of attention sharpening that had not sharpened for the wagons before hers. The water took the wheels at the same mark it had taken every wagon that day. Nothing about the crossing distinguished itself. No lurch, no cry, no moment that would have made a story on its own. The mules leaned into the current, found the packed gravel he had walked before them, and pulled through into the shallows on the far side, with the wagon rocking once, hard, and then settling. She did not look at him as she passed the place where he sat the horse. She looked at the water, the way she always looked at it, as though she were keeping an account with it that had nothing to do with him. He watched her reach the far bank and set the brake and climb down to check the wheel hubs with her own hands before she checked anything else, and only then did he turn the horse back toward the channel to walk the line again for the wagon behind her, his face giving away nothing, though the men nearest him would later say, when the telling of it mattered enough to be exact, that he had watched her longer than the crossing required. The account of what happened next would be told in pieces, by different men, for years, and no two tellings would agree on the small things, whether the sun had gone behind cloud by then, whether the horse had shied at a rock, or a shadow the rock threw across the water. But every telling agreed on the shape of it, the way a scar agrees with the wound that made it. He had gone back into the channel to walk the line for the last wagon, as he had done 11 times that day, and the horse took 2 steps past the mark it had taken every other time, and found nothing under its hoof but water. Later men would say the current had cut a new hole in the night, working loose gravel the rest of the day had packed down. There was no way to know, and it did not matter. The horse's shoulder dropped. It threw its head back once, hard, the way an animal does when the ground it trusted is gone, and then it went sideways, and he went with it. He did not cry out. That detail would be repeated more than any other, as though the silence itself were the frightening part. He went under the way a man goes under when he has not had time to draw the breath for it, and the current, which had been patient with every wagon and every ox and every child's hand trailing over a wagon bed all day, took him without ceremony and carried him 20 feet downstream and set him against a log that had been sunk in that river long before any of them had been born, blackened and slick and solid as a fence post. His leg caught the log first. The bone did not break so much as announce itself, a sound some of the men on the bank swore they heard over the water, though the water was loud enough that this was likely only what the mind supplies afterward to make a memory whole. He came up once, mouth open, eyes finding the sky, and went under again, and the current pinned him there against the log with the patient, uninterested weight of a river that had no argument with him, and no mercy either. 3 men stood on the bank. One had his hand already on his coat buttons, undoing them for reasons his own body seemed to decide without him, and did not finish. One had waded in to his knees the day before to fetch a dropped hat, and had told the story of it twice since, and now stood with his boots still dry, watching the water the way a man watches a fire he has decided is not his to put out. The third said nothing at all, only looked from the log to the bank and back again, doing an arithmetic that came out wrong every time he tried it. None of them moved. What happened next did not look, to those on the bank, like courage. It looked like a woman walking into water she had no business walking into, skirts already dark to the knee, then the thigh, her arms out from her body the way a person walks, who has decided the ground beneath her cannot be trusted. She had been at the fire when the horse went down. She had left the coffee pot standing in the ash without a thought for it. Now the current took her skirts and pulled, and she leaned into it the way she leaned into a wind that wanted her off her feet and did not go. The cold announced itself in stages. First the shock of it against her calves, a burn more than a chill. Then the numbness that crept upward and made her feet foreign to her, objects she directed rather than felt. She found the bottom with her toes, lost it, found it again. The log that held him was 3 lengths out, and each length asked something different of her. The first for balance, the second for breath, the third for a kind of surrender to the water's argument, letting it carry her sideways toward him, rather than fighting it straight on. She reached the log with both hands and felt the cold of it, slicker than she expected, bark long since scoured away. She braced her forearm against it and found his coat first, a fistful of wet wool, and pulled, and nothing happened. The current had him wedged where his body had gone under, one boot hooked in the tangle of a root the log had not shed. She went under herself then, eyes open in the brown water, and saw his face there, slack and pale, mouth still open from whatever breath he had last tried to take, and something in her chest turned over slow and hard. She came up for air and went down again. This time she did not reach for the coat. She reached for the boot, for the root, for the wedge of ankle caught between them, and worked it with fingers that no longer felt like her own, numb past the second knuckle, until the boot gave, not free of the root, but loose enough that the current, pulling at him from the other side, did the rest. He came away from the log all at once, heavy as a felled tree, and she went under with him, her arms locked around his chest, the way a person locks around something they have decided not to let the world take back. She found her feet on the second try. She did not remember finding them the first. The bank came up sudden beneath her knees, mud and root and gravel all at once, and she did not remember climbing it so much as finding herself already there, his weight dragging against the pull of the current, one final time before the river gave him up entirely. She hauled him clear of the water by the collar of his shirt, heels digging furrows in the wet earth, until his shoulders cleared the mud line, and she could no longer feel her own arms as belonging to her. She did not stop to consider whether anyone watched. She would learn later that everyone had. The camp had gone quiet in the particular way a camp goes quiet when it does not know what it is looking at. Men who had stood on the bank moments before, calling instructions that meant nothing, calling his name in voices too high to be useful, now stood with their hands loose at their sides, watching a heavy-set widow kneel in the mud over the man who had called her dead weight 3 nights before, loud enough for every wagon to hear. She rolled him onto his side. Water came up out of him in a thin brown stream, and she thumped his back with the flat of her hand, twice, hard, the way she had done for a drowning child once on a different river in a different life. And he coughed, and breathed, and the breath rattled wrong in his chest, but it was breath. His leg lay bent beneath him at an angle no leg was meant to hold. She saw it before she understood what she was seeing. The boot turned nearly backward, the trouser dark and darkening further, the shape of the shin wrong under the cloth in a way that made her stomach fold. She did not touch it yet. She put her palm flat against his sternum instead, and felt for the rise and fall, counted it, made herself slow enough to count it twice, because her own heart was going too fast to trust as a measure of anything. No one moved to help her, not at first. The silence held the way silence holds after a shot is fired, and before anyone has decided whether to run toward it or away. She said his name once, low, not a question so much as a test, and got nothing back but the rattle of his breathing and the twitch of his fingers against the mud. She looked up then, not for permission, she would say later, though it may have looked that way, and found a ring of faces she had known for 6 weeks, and none of whom she could read, and beyond them the trail boss's wife, with a hand pressed to her mouth, and beyond her, the boy who drove the second wagon, staring at her arms as though he had never before considered what arms like hers might be for. She turned back to the leg. Someone would need a splint. Someone would need to boil water. She said so aloud, to no one in particular, and waited to see who would move first. The man who finally moved was the one they called the surgeon, though he had not lanced a boil nor pulled a tooth since Fort Kearny, and some in the company doubted whether the title had ever been earned outside of his own telling. He was old, older than anyone else on the trail, with hands spotted brown and a stoop that made him look perpetually apologetic, and he came down the bank slow, testing his footing on the wet stones the way a man tests ice he does not trust. He knelt where she knelt. He did not ask her to move aside. That, she would remember later, was the first small mercy of the whole terrible afternoon, that he simply lowered himself into the mud beside her, as though she were already known to him as someone worth kneeling next to. His fingers went along the leg with a care that made the injured man groan even through the fog he was sinking into, and the old surgeon's mouth tightened at each new place his hands stopped. He worked in silence for the length of perhaps a minute, which on that bank, in that cold, felt considerably longer. Then he sat back on his heels and said, to the ring of faces rather than to her, that the bone was shattered, not cracked, not merely broken, but come apart in more than one place beneath the skin, and that if it were set wrong, it would knit wrong, and a leg knit wrong on the trail was a leg a man carried the rest of his life, when he was lucky, and the rest of his life shortened by fever, when he was not. He said this plainly, the way men say hard things when they have said too many of them before, to bother softening the edges. She had not meant to speak. She would say later that the words came up out of her before she had decided to let them. But she told him she had set bones. Her own father's collarbone after a fall from a hay wagon, a neighbor's forearm the winter the ice broke early, her own husband's fingers, more than once, though she did not say that last part aloud. Not there, not yet. She said she knew the pull of it, the particular give a joint made just before it seated true, and she asked, not as a favor but as a fact, laid on the ground between them, to be the one who did it. The old surgeon looked at her a long moment. He looked at her hands, which were still red from the current, still trembling faintly though she willed them not to. He looked at the ring of faces around them, waiting to see which way the wind would turn. Then he asked her, quietly enough that only she, and perhaps the trail boss's wife, could hear it, whether she had ever set one where the man might die if she was wrong. She said she had not one where the stakes ran that high. Then she said the man was already halfway to dying from the cold water and the weight, and that waiting further would not make her hands any steadier. The surgeon nodded once, as if she had passed some test he had not announced beforehand, and stepped back. She sent a boy for her cast iron pot, the same one she had used to feed 30 families a night since the crossing began, and had it filled with water set to boil over the fire until it ran clean of char. She tore a bedsheet into strips, boiled those too, and laid them across a clean board to dry in the wind. She found 2 lengths of ash wood from the wagon's spare axle stock and shaved them smooth with her own knife, testing their give against her knee before she was satisfied. He did not speak while she worked. His face had gone the color of ash itself, and his jaw was set so hard the muscles stood out beneath the stubble, but he did not cry out. Not when she washed the wound in the pot's hot water. Not when her fingers found the break and pressed along it to judge the angle. She worked with her sleeves pushed to the elbow, her hands moving with the same unhurried certainty she brought to kneading dough or gutting a hair, and there was something in the watching crowd that quieted further with each motion, as though they were witnessing a kind of speech they had not known she was capable of making. She told him, once, low enough that only he could hear it, that this next part would hurt worse than the water had. He said nothing. She pulled the leg straight in one motion, and he made a sound through his teeth that was not a word, and then it was done, the bone seated, the give she had told the surgeon about arriving exactly where she said it would. The surgeon knelt and ran his hands along the splint she had bound, testing the tension of the cloth strips, the snugness of the ashwood braces against either side of the shin. He did not correct a single rap. He looked up at her once, and then at the crowd, and said only that it would hold, and that he had seen worse done by men who called themselves doctors in St. Louis. No one laughed this time. No one made a sound at all. The fire cracked, and somewhere behind the wagons a mule shifted its feet in the mud, and the light kept failing toward evening, the way it always did, indifferent to what had just been decided among them. What changed overnight could not be traced to any single word spoken. It showed itself instead in small acts, the kind that did not announce themselves as kindness, but were kindness all the same. A woman who had not looked at her directly in 11 days brought over a tin of dried apples before sunrise, set it on the tailgate without comment, and walked back to her own fire as if she had done nothing at all. A man who had laughed loudest at the campfire the night she was called dead weight now stood near her wagon with his hat in his hands, asking, in a voice gone quiet, whether she needed help lifting the water barrels. She did not need help. She let him lift them anyway, because refusing would have cost him something he was trying, clumsily, to give. The families who had kept their children from playing near her wagon as though her sighs were a contagion, now sent them to fetch kindling for her fire without being asked. Nobody spoke of the river aloud. They spoke around it, in the shape of the help they offered, in the way conversations quieted when she passed, and then resumed, softer, more careful. By the second morning it was decided, without a vote or a meeting, that the guide would ride in her wagon for the duration of the mending. No one else volunteered a bed, and no one argued that one should be found elsewhere. He was carried on a plank litter, 4 men bearing the weight of him, with an awkwardness that suggested none of them had done such work before, and set down among her sacks of meal and her rolled bedding, his splinted leg propped on a folded blanket she had prepared that morning, without being told to. He did not thank her for the space. He lay still, staring up at the canvas arch of the wagon cover, his jaw tight the way it got when the trail rocked the wheel beneath a bad hip of ground, and said nothing for the better part of that day's travel. She fed him at midday and again toward evening, broth first, then bread softened in it, holding the tin cup steady when the wagon lurched and his hand would not hold it steady on its own. He watched her do this with an expression she could not read, something between shame and a kind of arithmetic, as if he were counting a debt he had no way yet to name, let alone repay. The days settled into a rhythm neither of them had chosen, but both came to expect. 3 weeks of river crossings and dry camps, 3 weeks of the wagon's canvas snapping in the wind, and the smell of crushed sage rising from the wheels, and somewhere inside that repetition, the silence between them began to loosen, one word at a time. He asked about her hands first. Noticed the way she worked dough without looking at it, the way she could tell the fire was right by its sound alone. She told him about the years before the trail, the kitchen she had kept in Ohio, the way her husband had liked her cooking well enough to marry her, and liked it less well, as the years added weight to her, the way good years do to any woman who feeds a household before she feeds herself. Then, one evening with the broth gone cold between them and no one else within earshot, she told him the rest. How he had called her dead weight the winter their crops failed, the same words, near enough, that had come out of another man's mouth at a different fire not so many months back. How he had left in the spring for a claim further west and never sent for her, and how the neighbors had said nothing, because a man leaving a heavy wife surprised no one and needed no explaining. Silas did not speak for a long while after that. The wagon rocked over a rut, and his splinted leg shifted against the folded blanket, and he winced without complaint, the way he had learned to. "I said the same thing," he said finally, not an apology, a fact laid down like a stone. "I heard you say it," she answered. He looked at the canvas arch above him instead of at her. "Didn't know I was saying his words till just now." She did not answer that, only refilled the tin cup and held it steady against the lurch of the road, and he drank without looking away from the ceiling, his jaw working at something that was not the broth. After that, the quiet between them changed shape. It was still quiet, but it was no longer empty. He asked about the crops that failed, what kind of winter it had been, whether she had thought of turning back. She asked him nothing about himself yet, sensing there was a debt of listening still to be paid, and he seemed to sense it too, offering pieces of his own trail years, the way a man offers coins he isn't sure will be accepted, carefully, and only a few at a time. It was on the 4th morning of this new quiet that he began to earn his place in the wagon bed rather than simply occupy it. He could not walk, could not lift, could not do the things a man on this trail was measured by, but he could see. He had ridden this stretch of ground twice before, and the land had left its shape in him the way a hard winter leaves its shape in a man's knees. He told her where the ruts would run deep after the next rise, where the grass thinned to rock, where a slow ford waited 2 days out that would spare the oxen if she bore left instead of following the wheel tracks ahead. She listened, she adjusted, the wagon rode easier for it, and she said nothing about that either, only noted it the way she noted weather. He corrected her pace without meaning to lecture, a low word here, a nod there, an observation about the sun's angle that told her more plainly than any watch how many hours of light remained. She had learned the trail by necessity, by watching others and getting it wrong until she got it right. He had learned it as a trade, and the difference showed in small ways, in things she had not known to ask. It was on the 6th morning that she went to the back of the wagon for the flour sack, and her hand brushed the strip of canvas wrapped tight around a shape she had carried since Missouri, and he saw her hesitate over it the way she always did, and this time he did not look away. "Your man?" he asked. "My boy," she said. "Would have been 4 this spring." He was quiet a long moment, the wheels grinding beneath them, the dust rising past the canvas flap in a long gold rope. "Had a wife," he said. "And a son. Fever took them both the same week, 3 years back, other side of the mountains." He said it the way he said everything now, plain, without asking for anything in return. "Didn't bring anything of theirs with me. Thought it'd be easier." Was it? No. She did not press him further, and he did not offer more, but something had passed between them that neither named. 2 griefs laid side by side in the wagon bed like 2 tools that fit the same worn hands, and the wheels kept turning under the weight of both. 11 weeks after the river had tried to take him, the company came down out of the last dry hills and saw the valley spread green below them, and someone near the front of the line began to cry without shame, and no one told her to stop. He noted the date the way he had noted little else on the whole crossing. The 11th of September, the grass still holding its color, the air carrying a wet, cold water smell that none of them had breathed since Missouri. He noted it because he was no longer riding at the head of the company when it happened. He was walking beside her wagon, one hand on the sideboard, a hickory cane in the other that the blacksmith's boy had cut and shaped for him 3 weeks back, and his leg, set crooked by a man who had done his best with a busted door plank and no proper splint, took the weight without folding, though it never again sat straight beneath him. He had given up the lead position outside of any ceremony. It had simply happened, the way most true things happened on the trail, not announced, not decided in a single hour, but arrived at across many small mornings when he found himself walking to her wagon instead of to his horse, until the company stopped expecting otherwise. Younger men rode point now, men with 2 good legs and no memory of what had been said at the fire that first cruel night. He did not mind giving it up. He had found, somewhere in the 11 weeks of limping and mending and sharing the wagon's meager shade, that leading from the front had never suited him half so well as he'd believed. She noticed the shift before he named it to himself. She noticed the way he no longer scanned the horizon like a man measuring danger for the whole company, but instead measured his own steps, careful of the leg, careful of the ruts, matching his pace to the slow grind of her wheels. She said nothing of it. She had learned, across those weeks, that he showed a thing before he spoke it, and that speaking too soon on his behalf only made him retreat into silence again. The valley widened below them, its rivers threading pale through the trees, and word passed back along the company that the company elders meant to call a meeting once the wagons were settled, to divide the land, to set the claims, to decide, as such men always decided, who among the arrived was fit to stay. The meeting was held in the open, under a sky gone the color of weak tea with dust. The company gathered on trampled grass, with the surveyor's stakes already driven at the field's edge. The elders sat on a wagon bench dragged out for the purpose. She stood at the back with the other women, her hands folded over her apron, and he noticed she had chosen the place farthest from where the talking would happen, as if she meant to make it easy for them to forget she was there at all. The ledger went around. Names were read, claims assigned, a murmur of satisfaction rising each time a family heard its acreage called. Then her name came, alone, without a husband's name beside it, and a man near the front, new to the company, joined only at the last river crossing, still soft in the hands, laughed before he spoke. He said a woman her size had no business working a claim by herself, said the land wanted a back that could bend to it, not one that would sit heavy and useless through a hard winter, said it the way men said such things when they believed the room agreed with them already. The silence that followed was not agreement, it was the silence of people waiting to see who would speak first. He stood. The leg took its price for the sudden motion, and he let it, did not lean on the wagon wheel beside him, though it would have eased the ache. He said that he had gone under the current at the Platte with a shattered leg, while 3 better men stood frozen on the bank, and that it was her arms, and no one else's, that had pulled him back onto dry ground. He said he had mocked her weight once, at a fire, in front of half this company, and that every word of it had been wrong. He said her claim would stand, and that if any man wished to argue it, he could argue it with the man whose name would go beside hers on the ledger, his own. No one argued. The elder with the book looked at her, then at him, then wrote without asking either of them to confirm what he had already understood. The newcomer studied the ground. Somewhere behind her, a child laughed at something unrelated, and the ordinary noise of the camp folded back over the moment, as if it had never been anything but ordinary. She did not look at him, but her hands, still folded, had stopped gripping the apron so tightly, and that, he had learned by now, was how she said thank you when the words themselves would have cost her too much. By the time the record of that meeting had gone yellow at its edges, the way station stood finished on the bend where the trail forked north, a low log building with a stone chimney and a corral fenced by hands that no longer needed a splint to hold a rail steady. The pot came first, before the roof was even sound, a cast iron pot, dented on one side from some earlier life, set over a fire pit dug into the yard, and it had not gone cold since. Trains came through hungry and left fed. Word passed rider to rider the way word does out there, plain and without ornament. Stop at the bend, the woman feeds you right, the man will look at your wheel if it's cracked. They were married in October, in the manner of the frontier, which is to say, without much ceremony at all. A circuit preacher passing through said the words over them in the yard, between one train's departure and the next one's arrival, and the witnesses were whoever happened to be standing there with a plate in hand. No one threw anything. No one gave a speech. He wore the same coat he always wore, and she wore an apron over her good dress because there was stew to tend before the light went, and neither of them thought this strange enough to remark on. It was not gratitude that had brought them to it, not the debt of a river crossing paid out over years, though that was where it had started. It was the plainer accumulation of mornings, of harness mended before she asked, of bread set aside for him without a word, of 2 people who had each been told once, by people who mattered to them and shouldn't have, that they were not enough, and who had gone on proving otherwise to no one but each other. The leg never straightened. He walked with the list of it the rest of his life, and when new trains asked how he'd come by the limp, he told them the truth without softening it, and let them draw their own conclusions about the woman ladling stew a few feet away. She never spoke of the husband who had left, or the fire where she'd been named dead weight in front of half a company. She did not need to. The pot was still on when the first wagons came each spring, and it was still on when the last ones passed each fall, and on the frontier, where a man's worth was weighed by his hands, and not the noise of a crowd, that was answer enough for anyone who thought to ask.